Have you ever heard a company say, think outside the box, but then turn right around and hire people who've been in the same damn box for the last 20 years?
Welcome back to the Slog Pod, where we question the work culture we've been sold and search for smarter paths forward. Today, why companies keep hiring hyper specialists when what they need are generalists who can think, adapt, and navigate chaos. And we've got the numbers to prove it. I've watched companies facing major change double down on safe hires with narrow resumes. Meanwhile, they ignore people who've built entire systems, crossed industries, and managed uncertainty. I look at my own industry, or at least for the last 15 plus years, mental health, where most people have some sort of an advanced degree. Everyone's specialized in something. You've got psychologists that do testing. You've got people that work with kids or adults. You've got people that work with couples, families, substance use, trauma. The list goes on and on, all specialists. So I think that this plays into almost every industry when we talk about specialists versus generalists. My questions are, who are the people being promoted? How are they being viewed? And is this happening across industries? It seems like it likely is. Mm-hmm. And are the right people being promoted? Are we finding efficiency? Because it often seems to me that the specialists are the ones who often rise to the top. But those are also the people who can't necessarily cross silos or innovate.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the last time I was in a position of trying to hire someone. And as I'm going through resumes, there's a couple of external factors that are on my mind as I'm going through that process. And one of them was I was leaving the organization. I was on my way out. I'm effectively hiring my replacement. And I know this subconsciously. And in my mind, I couldn't help but get stuck on, as I'm doing that first, you get the first 20 applications you get, and you're going through that initial process of weeding out certain resumes for various reasons. Those external pressures or factors were weighing heavily on how I made the decision of which top 5 I was going to take. And all 5 of those top candidates were people whose resumes were very narrow and specialized to the job. I was looking for people who'd already done it, who weren't going to need a lot of training, for people who had a demonstrated record of success in that particular specialty. What I was not looking for was potential. What was the individual's potential? What did their resume and the various stops they'd made on their career, what story did that tell in terms of what they might be able to do in the future? So my process was very much a point in time, immediate, short-term view. And I kind of kick myself because I just wonder who might have gotten missed in that pile of 20, expanding that out, thinking the 20 that got to me weren't all the applications or resumes that came in. There were probably hundreds for that job, which means someone in HR had a similar process to get to that. And the only resumes I got were the specialists, not the generalists. Now, the person who's in that role now, if he's still there, I'm sure is doing a fine job. So the point isn't that I made a wrong decision. I'm just saying that when I reflect on that, I made an incomplete decision because of the parameters I put on my own process. So I think you're right. I think it is very common. And I think a lot of hiring decision makers probably do that. They narrow it down by what they're looking for is something predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be a disruption?
Sure. What caught my ear was when you said they look for people who had already done the job. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Huge assumption there.
There's a gigantic assumption.
Just because they did the job doesn't mean they were good at it.
Right.
There's nothing in that experience that indicates whether they're going to be able to think outside the box and adapt to change and be flexible as conditions change. So again, a limited view.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's do a deep dive. And I think that starts with our status quo bias and kind of look at what the data shows. A Harvard Business Review study found generalists adapt faster to changing environments and excel in complex, ambiguous roles, while overspecialization limits perspective and agility. According to LinkedIn's Global Talent Trends, 92% of talent professionals say soft skills and adaptability are equally or more important than technical skills. But only 41% say their hiring processes effectively assess these traits. A study in the Journal of Applied Psychology showed that breadth of experience is correlated with increased creative performance and innovation, critical in environments with rapid technological change. And lastly, specialization also has a shelf life. The World Economic Forum predicts that 50% of all employees will need reskilling by 2027, reflecting the speed at which specialized knowledge becomes obsolete. Yet companies are still screening for narrow lanes when the highway is crumbling.
Mm-hmm. Why do organizations do that? Why do they tend to stick with specialists? First, I think there's the status quo bias.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned it briefly in my story. There's something safe and familiar with hiring that specialist, someone who's done the job before. And I think what that does is it reduces the perceived risk for that hiring manager, or for systems where the KPIs aren't necessarily tied to innovation or creativity. So it's the system itself seems to favor that safe, someone who's been in that lane.
Sure.
Another thing I think is that generalists challenge outdated processes or processes that are becoming outdated in real time, which I can imagine feels threatening to, say, your mid-level manager or leader who's really interested in protecting the status quo or their own silo.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is credentialism culture. I think that falsely equates narrow linear experience with reliability, which I think is based on just a huge assumption. Who's to say that that narrow experience is going to equal reliability? It doesn't always.
That does sound like a huge assumption. Companies say they want innovation, but they keep hiring the same profiles and wonder why nothing changes.
And they'll turn around and blame the market or find some other scapegoat when it fails, and not look at the fact that maybe they've hired people that were trained to maintain rather than adapt.
Sure. It seems generalists aren't shallow, they're integrators who connect dots across domains, across silos. They excel at systems thinking, creative problem solving, and learning agility, really. The top skills identified by McKinsey Global Institute for Future Workforce Resilience. And yet many organizations' ATS systems filter out these profiles because they don't look, quote unquote, tidy. It's like trying to fix a sinking ship by hiring a lifeguard instead of an engineer who knows how to build a better ship.
Yes, exactly. Gosh, you know where my mind goes as you say that? Our time in the Army, our military experience. Think about that.
Yeah.
When you got out of the military, what was your experience like versus someone who had a more specialized role? So our job in the military.
We were grunts, we were infantry, shoot 'em up, bang, bang guys. And yeah, I remember coming back and you'd go to these job fairs or whatnot, and everybody, you were immediately put in a box. Okay, you could become a security guard or maybe a cop, which was interesting to me because I had already had a bachelor's degree and had work experience before that. So it didn't make any sense to me. I wanted it, and it's really interesting if you know anything about our job, because as an infantry soldier, you had to have knowledge across many silos, right? Not only did we have to know so many different weapon systems, but we were constantly working across with medics, mechanics, other divisions, air support. The list goes on, and you had to know other people's jobs as well as your own. So it's interesting that, and I can understand why people who had a very specialized jobs would get out and stay in that field.
Right, like someone who maybe had a aeronautical engineering specialty walks right into a job at Lockheed Martin. That makes perfect sense.
It does. It does.
But infantry, ironically, is not really a specialization type of job, even though it's a military specialty. the specialty itself is very generalist in nature. Like you said, you had to know so much and work across so many different systems.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same experience. It was frustrating to me that people didn't understand that. And who has time in an interview
Yeah.
for how do you say that fully in a resume where you've got so much space to list your accomplishments and what your job duties were? It's just so hard to capture the breadth of experience and that diversity of experience that comes with a job like the infantry. And I never was able to really effectively communicate that to anyone.
Yeah. I think of other examples too of looking back. I remember an interview some time ago, years ago, and somebody asked me about, do you do pivot tables in Excel? I don't know if you're familiar with pivot tables, but I am. But I found that to be an odd question because those aren't things that take a long, long time to learn. It's not like I'm going to take 6 months to learn how to do pivot tables in Excel. So that's just an odd question to me. But it told me that what they were looking for was someone that could walk in the door and do that day one. I found that question interesting because it's a task that is simple and doesn't take 6 months to learn. Therefore, pivot tables are something that you can usually learn in an afternoon at most. And you get adept at doing things over and over and over again, just like any job. You become a specialist because you're doing it over and over and over and over and over again. I get that. So I'm not sure that that was an appropriate question to ask. I just remember finding it strange that they would base a hiring on a question like that, that can be resolved within a couple of hours on the first day of someone's work.
Right. It seems such a short-sighted thing to ask.
It is. And I'm wondering if that isn't happening all over the place across many disciplines.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that impacts how we even view people who are specialists or people who are generalists or the gray area between.
Yeah. I've seen job postings that will list the core requirements for the job, like those prerequisite things that have to be there. There has to be a degree in a related field.
Sure.
X number of years of experience. I see those things. And I also see sometimes in jobs, they'll break out those preferred qualifications.
Sure.
Things that would be nice to have. And it seems like the pivot table experience is a good example of something. Yeah, it'd be nice if they had it, but are we looking for the person who has things that are going to pay off over the long term? When we should assume that someone is able to learn something that's relatively simple in a short amount of time through repetition.
Sure.
Which, like you said, that's every job. I've never had a job where I didn't have to learn something new that I wasn't able to get it going pretty quickly.
Sure.
You do it for a week or two and you've got it down. So why would they ask that as a primary qualification?
Yeah.
Just
doesn't make any sense.
It baffles me.
Even as you talk about the number of years you have to have done this certain thing, that to me, there's so many things that are silly in all this, kind of arbitrary. Doesn't make a lot of sense why they ask it. And you're going to get so much on the job specialization in any of that anyway. So I guess my takeaways sometimes are that generalist, what you're really looking for, or what maybe people should look for, is somebody that can show the ability to learn quickly and reach across. If anything, that reaching across silos, that innovating is a bigger skill than almost any specialization you could have.
And how many questions in an interview have you had that were designed to get that information or to assess?
Almost zero.
Zero. Yeah.
There's something there, right?
It makes you wonder what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what do we do with it? Are we on the right path? Is it okay to even be questioning this? Is this something that others are wondering about?
I think so. I've seen, like on LinkedIn, I've seen people post certain things that are content that hints towards this. Are you hiring for potential or are you hiring for experience? Are you looking for a balance of both? Like just those challenging type of questions, which I think is great. I think we really should be challenging how things have gone, at least for the jobs I've had or have been hiring for. Certainly.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering what the impact is on our systems, on our organizations when that's the process.
Mhm.
Again, it feels very stale when you're hiring the same people again and again and again that have already done whatever it is again and again and again.
Yeah.
You're not looking for any change, or at least it seems like it, right?
Yeah. And it's like in those systems, it's almost as if the breadth of experience and adaptability are like giant red flags to those organizations.
Yes. It's just the opposite of the way it should be.
They're saying, sorry, you've done too many things. We're looking for someone who's just been in this one lane and stayed there. But what if that one lane leads directly off the edge of a cliff?
Sure.
It's worse, you know?
Absolutely.
So
It's odd.
So some solutions, questions that we should be asking ourselves.
It seems like the reasonable questions are to kind of maybe go in and figure out what your hiring practice is like, audit it. What is your promoting practices? Are you promoting specialists? Or are you trying to find generalists? Because oftentimes I believe that it seems like specialists oftentimes get promoted. Well, what happens when now they have to cross silos? They absolutely have to, but haven't been conditioned to even do that.
Like they've
Not
never
to
had
mention they've got a bias towards their specialization, I would assume. Audit your training, leadership. What does that look like? Bonusing practice. Are you screening out generalists because they don't match an outdated checklist? Is that what's happening? Are those fair questions?
Yeah. I think another great question is, are we actively seeking that breadth? Experience across multiple functions, industries, and crisis situations, I would think predict adaptability and creative problem solving.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And leaders, as far as solution, leaders must examine if they're hiring to preserve comfort or to adapt to reality. Change is fast, complex, and constant. Are you hiring for today, for the status quo, or for the ever-changing world that's here now? I guess these are some of the self-reflective questions we're asking. And I'm asking that across all organizations, businesses, disciplines. Those seem reasonable questions to ask or directions to go.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this has been the Slog Pod. So if you're a generalist out there, just know this. We think your breadth of experience is your superpower, even if the system hasn't quite caught up yet. If you're a hiring manager, ask yourself some of these questions. Ask yourself whether or not you might be part of the problem.
Yeah, because if your hiring process is optimized for the past, you're building a team that will fail in the future. So until next time, keep questioning the system and don't buy into the myth that depth without breadth is what will save your organization.
Good talk, man.
Cheers.
Cheers.